Hello there, Hollows. So then, the Frigid Outskirts is often seen as being one of the worst areas in, I'd say, the entire Souls series. So I thought, in this video, in response to a comment by Melitaku, who said, "The Frigid Outskirts is a good idea conceptually, but was executed poorly and put into the wrong game." He said, don't actually do this, don't actually make a video out of this idea, but I actually think it could be a good idea for a video, because the Frigid Outskirts is, like I said, seen as being one of, if not the worst area in the entire Souls series. Many people always single it out as being a terrible idea and an area that was just done awfully. So I thought, let's take this area, figure out exactly what it is that's wrong with it, and then how it could be improved. And the good thing about this area is there is actually an example of an area that does this same idea better, but we're going to talk about that in a bit. So first of all, what is it that makes the Frigid Outskirts so bad? Now, when you first get to this area, it's essentially a snowy tundra. It's supposed to be the outskirts of an area, obviously it's why it's called the Frigid Outskirts, and you constantly have a storm that's essentially rolling in all the time, full of like a foggy snow all the time, so you can barely see where you're going, a proper blizzard. And that means that you can't really see where you're going properly, but there's a few structures which you can sort of see to sort of figure out and navigate where you are properly. Now, on paper, this is a really cool idea because you feel lost, you feel helpless like you would in a snowstorm. So you're trying to navigate through this area to try and find the small little structures that are there, because those are essentially your temporary safe havens while you're trying to get to the end of this level. Now, like I said, it's a really cool idea on paper, but I think there's two things that make this incredibly frustrating and to the point where it is seen as being one of the worst areas in all of Souls. Number one is obviously the main enemy of this area. The main enemy of this area are the frozen reindeer, but people tend to call them horses or unicorns, or I don't know, people call them lots of things. They're known as frozen reindeer. Now, these constantly attack you whenever you are in the snowy blizzard sections of this area. So this recurring blizzard, these frozen reindeer will always attack you non-stop when you're going through this area, and they do a lot of damage. Even if you have the help of some NPCs which you can summon in, they're still really difficult. They have a lot of health, they do a lot of damage, and their attacks are really unpredictable and are really hard to get the timings down for. And the fact that these constantly respawn every time you're going through this recurring blizzard is the number one main issue, I'd say, with this area. This wouldn't be that bad if it was the first time you're going through this area, or the only time you have to go through this area. So you get through the area, then there's a bonfire at the end. That would not be an issue. But the number one thing which makes this area so bad is the fact that this is a boss run. You have to go through this entire massive area every single time you want to fight the boss. This is just a terrible, terrible idea, and I do not understand why this was done. You do have, of course, the other areas like the chasms of old, which are quite frustrating to get through to get to the boss. You have the other DLC areas like to fight the gang squad, to fight the blue smelter demon. These are also really bad, and they are also boss runs. But I think what makes this one even worse is that for a lot of the time you're just essentially running and running and running. You barely have an idea of where you're going, and you're constantly being assaulted by very, very powerful enemies. There are two main ways to get through this area. Number one, you have to try and navigate by, generally because the blizzard sort of subsides sometimes, you can actually see the structures, which generally are good markers to figure out how to get to the boss. And then also, if you keep constantly killing these frozen reindeer, eventually they will despawn. If you kill, I think it's the reindeer in the first area 17 times, the second section 22 times, and the third section 30 times, the enemies, the horses, will eventually stop spawning, which means that it does make going through here much easier. But who wants to actually spend all that time constantly defeating the same enemy over and over and over again? You might want to do that if, for example, you're doing a Soul Level 1 run, and therefore you need lots and lots of tries at Blood and Zalan because it's a pretty challenging boss fight by yourself. So that is something that you might want to actually do if you're doing a Soul Level 1 run. But other than that, you don't really want to do this because it's boring, it's tedious, it's time consuming. People don't really want to do that. Now, how would you actually fix this area? I think number one, take out the frozen reindeer, or just make it so they don't do as much damage, or their attacks are much more telegraphed and easier to dodge around. Because if you're going to have an enemy that is constantly attacking you in the fog, then you probably don't want it to be really difficult, really challenging, and hard to constantly defeat over and over and over again. Second, I think the blizzard is a little bit too extreme, because a lot of the time you just can't see where you're going. You just have no idea where it is you're going because the blizzard is just so bad. And I think calming down the fog a little bit would make it a little bit better. It would still have the same concept, but you'd be able to see where you're going a little bit more, which would make it a bit better. Or the other thing you could do is have more structures. Have more frequent structures, and maybe have sconces that you could light with your torch in certain areas, which would make sense, obviously, because normally you'd think, oh, the wind or the snow would just blow it out. But have it so maybe it would make sense in these certain areas. Maybe have it so you could even do something else. So it's not like a torch, maybe it's some other function which would allow you to make a path which you can very easily see. Maybe light, I don't know, turn some lights on, do something that would make it a bit more easy to figure out the way in which you're supposed to be going. Those are the main things, and the other one would be obviously to have a bonfire. You know, have a bonfire right before the boss, or because I actually think this area would be a really good traditional Souls level if you have the gimmick of the blizzard, but have it be done in a way that's a traditional Souls level with shortcuts that go back and then allow you a nice path to the boss. Having this kind of gimmick where you're in the outskirts of snowy tundra with a constant blizzard you're struggling to see, it's a cool idea, but I think it's just really executed incredibly poorly. Now, Elden Ring did sort of reuse this idea with the consecrated snowfield, which is a much better version of this, but I still don't think it's done quite well, because they take this gimmick of the recurring blizzard, but have it just for one section, so you have to get through this blizzard. And then once you're through this little blizzard, there's no like areas you have to get to. You don't really feel lost. You just have to sort of go in a straight line. And then once you get through the blizzard, there's a site of grace, and then you're out of it. And you never have to go through there again. So it doesn't really do the area justice, and it doesn't really do the idea justice, in my opinion, because the concept on paper is really good. But I can understand why they would have struggled to sort of get the execution right, because a gimmick of, the player not being able to see and feeling lost can be frustrating very easily. But I think the main issue here is lack of a bonfire. I think that's the number one issue. If there was a bonfire here in the Frigid Outskirts, this would just be so much better. You have a bonfire, even if it's just halfway through the area, it would be a million times better. But the idea of, lost buildings, like a town that was forgotten on the outskirts during a snowy blizzard. You could have structures, you could have like a clock tower in there, you could have loads of really cool buildings that are just frozen, and your time has forgotten them because of the blizzard, that's a snowstorm, it killed people. You could have, like people that have been frozen to death all over the place. There's a really cool idea here, but it just wasn't done well enough, in my opinion. So, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Maybe if you share this video with anyone who might feel it was good enough. Thank you again for watching. This is SoulReborn, signing out. Have a good one.